Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Market Update, where we discuss leading financial and economic developments in Asia, Europe, and North America. My name is Tony. It's been a big day. We have a lot to cover. Let's jump in. And we begin in North America. The Trump administration is pushing forward with plans to impose tariffs on semiconductors and pharmaceutical imports, launching formal investigations that could significantly widen the scope of the ongoing U.S. trade reset. According to notices published Monday in the Federal Register, the Commerce Department has initiated Section 232 probes to assess whether imports of chips and drug ingredients pose national security risks. The investigations mark a major escalation in President Donald Trump's efforts to revitalize domestic manufacturing. While the administration recently excluded smartphones, laptops, and some electronics from retaliatory tariffs on Chinese imports, offering temporary relief to tech giants like Apple and Nvidia, officials warned that semiconductors would not be spared for long. We note that only retaliatory tariffs were excluded. Some tariffs still apply. The semiconductor probe will cover a broad swath of products, including legacy chips, advanced processors critical for AI, and the equipment used to produce them. This could disrupt an industry that generated over $600 billion in global sales and is already under pressure from pandemic-era disruptions. Foreign chip makers like Taiwan's TSMC and South Korea's SK Hynix could face new tariffs, potentially increasing costs or squeezing margins. Even U.S. plans to boost domestic chip production may be jeopardized, particularly if tariffs are imposed on advanced manufacturing equipment from suppliers like ASML of the Netherlands. In parallel, the Commerce Department is examining the importation of finished pharmaceuticals, generic drugs, and the ingredients required to produce them. U.S. drug makers like Johnson & Johnson have recently announced major domestic investments, but analysts warn that these efforts may not be enough to shield them from the looming trade barriers. Companies could be forced to absorb costs or raise drug prices, putting additional pressures on an already costly U.S. healthcare system. A spokesman for trade group PHRMA expressed, for example, quote, "The industry shares the administration's goal of boosting U.S. manufacturing, but medicines have historically been excluded from tariffs because they risk causing shortages of life-saving treatments," end quote. A recent survey by the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, BIO, underscores the sector's vulnerability, with nearly 90% of U.S. biotech firms relying on imported components. The group warned that the proposed tariffs could delay regulatory approvals and disrupt supplies to patients. While Trump is reportedly open to short-term exemptions, particularly for automakers seeking more time to shift production, analysts say that reshoring complex pharmaceutical and semiconductor supply chains will take some time. Quote, "Onshoring should be a national priority," end quote, said Bio President John Crowley, speaking to US-based The Wall Street Journal, adding, quote, "But we must weigh the short-term consequences these tariffs could inflict on innovation and access," end quote. The US president, however, by his actions is signaling one thing to these companies: accelerate this reshoring process. Next up, the UK government has announced a sweeping suspension of import tariffs on 89 products sold and expanded financial support for exporters in response to rising global trade tensions, particularly those sparked by the recent US trade hikes. Tariffs on items such as pasta, juices, plastics, plywood, and gardening supplies will be cut to zero for 2 years, a move expected to save British businesses at least £17 million annually. Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds said the measures aim to lower costs across supply chains, with the hope that savings will ultimately benefit consumers. To further bolster UK exporters, Chancellor Rachel Reeves unveiled a £20 billion increase in government-backed loan capacity, raising the total supply via UK export finance to £80 billion. Small businesses will be eligible for up to £2 million in financial assistance under the new scheme. The measures follow President Donald Trump's imposition of a 10% tariff on the UK. Though this is the lowest rate among countries, UK officials are increasingly pessimistic about securing an exemption through a bilateral trade deal. While Reynolds admitted he could not provide a timeline for US-UK trade negotiations, Reeves reaffirmed Labour's commitment to free and fair trade. Quote, "It is not the time to turn our backs on the world," end quote, she wrote in The Observer, highlighting efforts to strengthen ties with the EU, India, and countries across the Gulf, Asia, and Europe. Still, however, the US, with her massive consumption, remains the world's most important market. If you want to be on top of the world's most important economic and financial news as we move through this period of tremendous change, maybe consider subscribing to Market Update, and you will be. If you're getting some value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button. Next up, we move to Asia. Asian bonds are emerging as a relative safe haven in the wake of President Donald Trump's trade reset and global market turbulence. While US bond funds suffered $9.6 billion in outflows last week, Asian bond funds attracted $753 million, underscoring investors' shifting sentiment. Amid last week's volatility, Asian fixed income markets have demonstrated resilience, bolstered by regional central banks easing interest rates. Singapore, the Philippines, and India have all taken recent steps to loosen monetary policy, providing support to credit markets. Quote, investors are beginning to broaden their focus beyond the US, end quote, said Siram Reddy of Man Group, highlighting the growing appeal of global credit opportunities. Asian investment-grade bonds in particular have outperformed US counterparts, with narrower credit spread widening, indicating less perceived risk. Norbert Ling of Investico noted that the strength of Asia's credit market lies in its quality, with more than half the investment-grade index rated single A. Meanwhile, T. Rowe Price strategist Chris Kushlis expects Asia's central banks to continue rate cuts in response to lower inflation and slower growth, further supporting bonds. Although sectors tied to technology and trade remain exposed to US tariffs, financials, utilities, and infrastructure issuers are seen as more insulated. In a volatile environment, analysts suggest that Asian bonds, especially those with strong credit profiles, offer both stability and selective opportunity for global investors. Meanwhile, Singapore's central bank has further eased its monetary policy for the second time this year, as the escalating US tariffs and global trade tensions cast a long shadow over the trade-dependent city-state's economic outlook. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, announced on Monday, yesterday, that it would reduce slightly the rate of appreciation on the Singaporean dollar's nominal effective exchange rate while maintaining its long-standing policy of modest and gradual currency appreciation. The width and central level of the currency band remains unchanged. The move comes as Singapore downgraded its 2025 GDP growth forecast to between 0 and 2%. Down from an earlier projection of 1 to 3% and well below the 4.4% expansion recorded in 2024. In a statement, the MAS cited concerns over, quote, slowing global and regional trade, end quote, and heightened uncertainty due to protectionist policies, warning that these pressures could weigh on both external and domestic sectors of the economy. Singapore's monetary policy differs from most countries in that it uses the exchange rate rather than interest rates to maintain price stability. The latest easing, which was widely expected by economists, follows a similar move in January, the first since the pandemic-induced policy shift in March 2020. Meanwhile, Singapore's government continues to grapple with the ripple effects of the US-China trade war. New blanket tariffs from the Trump administration, including a 10% levy on many partners, are expected to significantly impact Singapore's export-driven economy. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong acknowledged the challenges last week, noting that growth would be, quote, significantly impacted, end quote. In a show of regional solidarity, Wong spoke with the Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba on Monday. Both leaders affirmed their commitment to a rules-based international order in the Indo-Pacific amid rising geopolitical tensions. Japan, also hit by new US tariffs, is preparing for high-stakes trade talks in Washington this week, with Ishiba emphasizing a need for thorough analysis and cooperation with Southeast Asian partners. Okay, that is today's episode of Market Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Tuesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.